Hello and welcome to China Focus. I'm Shelley Zhang. Well, after months of speculation, we finally saw on Thursday the next now 7 men who will rule the Chinese Communist Party. Here to talk about the new Politburo Standing Committee and the implications for China's future, we have China analysts Matt Gnesta and Chen Zhifei. So overall impressions of the new Standing Committee?
It's surprising and not surprising at all. You would be surprised if you believe the Communist Party will continue their current campaign of reform. In that sense, they could have brought in more reform-minded people like Wang Yang and Li Yuanchao, two prominent emissions from the left. However, if you consider this party's Congress, the context, the fallout of Bush July, you would naturally believe the consensus that, or within the party, the general belief is that we should keep the status quo. In that sense, the current lineup, primarily based on seniority, would fit the bill very well.
So just status quo, we're keeping the ship on course,
that
basically.
That seems to be the message that conveyed.
So any surprises in what we saw?
I think one key thing that people have been speculating is who will maintain control of the CCP Central Military Commission. And a lot of people speculated that Jintao would try to retain control. Maybe he did, but ultimately he's not. He's completely retired now, and Xi Jinping is in charge of the Central Military Commission. So that means that Jintao has totally stepped out, at least on the surface. And so that sort of confirms what had been speculated. That's significant because unlike Jiang Zemin, the former leader who 10 years ago who decided to keep the military role for an additional couple of years, Jintao has totally stepped back. That means it's sort of a go-ahead to the new leadership. At the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that Jintao is going to be completely out of the picture.
People had talked about basically he stacked the Central Military Commission with his people, so he doesn't need to be in there anymore. Would you agree with that?
Well, I found it hard to justify because if you look at Jintao's background, he has very little involvement with the military. This is very different from the current new leader, Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping was working for one of China's top military person right after his graduation from college. And not to mention his father himself was an old guard revolutionary working for Mao. So I guess there is a lot of difference between the background between Xi and Hu, and also a lot of different interpretations of their association with the military. I just want to add to what Matt just said, that is the significance of Hu Jintao's withdrawal from the top military post. That's very significant. I guess, however, note that Jiang Zemin's retention of the military power 10 years ago was kind of oddity. It was not allowed.
That's what I was going to ask. It's not
within the current rule. So what she did was actually a standard kind of procedure, and it has raised so much issue only because his predecessors didn't do that. Neither Jiang nor Deng, ahead of Jiang, did that. But Hu's intention was also clear. He wanted to minimize the chance of uncertainty. He wanted to bring some order to the chaotic hearts of China's political regime. He wanted to tell the people after him that, okay, no longer unusual behavior when it comes to power transfer. You have to follow the rule book. When you need to step down, you need to step down, you give up all the posts. I think that's probably the most significant legacies of Hu Jintao.
Well, I think there's hardly a political rule book in the Communist Party. I mean, look, you've only had basically 2 leadership transitions that follow some sort of rules. I mean, Deng Xiaoping, the leader before Jiang Zemin, I mean, he wasn't general secretary of the CCP, and he wasn't the president. He was just the head of the Central Military Commission, and that's where all of his power came from. So he was a supreme leader, even though there was a president who didn't have any power.
Jiang was not a position chill. Jiang was pretty unusual in that he was only a regular party member, but he kept the top post of a country's military job.
Right, but what I'm saying is there's no, regular set of rules that they always follow. I mean, is there a book that says, okay, well, you've got to keep this position when you make the power transfer? No, we're still my point is we're still seeing it kind of play out and evolve over time, and it really has a lot more to do with the internal sort of power struggles and the needs of who wants to be in power of what than trying to follow some sort of rule.
What is striking is when those two events happened, just to repeat what you said, when Deng and Jiang decided to keep the posts while they stepped down, China or the party was also in the chaotic, tumultuous period. When Deng Xiaoping did that, it was right after Tiananmen Square incident. He gave up the position only after the incident. And when Jiang happened, it was in the midst of crackdown against Falun Gong when there was so much dissension within the party against his crackdown. So he had to keep on the post to make sure the crackdown continued. And now China was in another, and the party was in another chaotic, uncertain period. Actually, the most challenging period since its takeover of the power in China. That's why what Xi Jinping, Hu Jintao did was so unorthodox, was so striking. Because according to not a history book, but the precedent that his predecessor has said, he should follow suit as well. That's very interesting, I think.
Do you think it might have been because Hu did not want to retain power anymore, or that he didn't want to take responsibility for what was going to happen?
I think that he doesn't want the responsibility. I think that he sees that, even though we've kind of got the status quo staying, that there's still a lot of uncertainty in what's going to happen. And Hu Jintao might be concerned that if something really goes awry and he's still got this official position, history will hold him responsible. And I think he doesn't want that. At the same time, he still is able to have some influence behind the scenes. I mean, look, how did he open the 18th Party Congress last week? He basically laid out the next 5 years for what Xi Jinping is going to have to accomplish.
But if you look at those plans, they're all boilerplate. They are the most conservative of all kinds of vocabulary.
That's true. Yeah, but everyone's using boilerplate. But it still shows that Hu Jintao has that kind of authority that he can lay that out. He didn't like give it to Xi Jinping to take it away, Xi.
That's what we were talking about in a previous China Focus with Jason Ma, where he was saying that basically, the next leadership is going to be weak because you have so many other past leaders who are kind of getting their hands into the pot, basically. So if Hu Jintao is stepping back from the military commission, does that mean he's going to stop interfering in the current leadership?
Well, you're talking about personal character. I think on that level, I can see some kind of frustration in Hu Jintao's body language and also in his conduct. He probably have given up. He tried his best, along with Wen Jiabao, to save this sinking ship of the Communist Party. But then he thought he had faced so much backlash from the party's base, which is very conservative, inscrutable, and inflexible in nature, as embodied by Jiang Zemin, which has been misinterpreted by the Western media as Jiang's lingering influence. I think that's totally wrong. I think that's totally off the base. What has happened is Jiang has become this manifestation of conservative force. Hu and Wen tried to fight against it, to save the party. They failed because the consensus was, okay, to keep the status quo, we have to bring back those old-timers who have no imagination at all. We should exclude people like Wang Yang, like Li Yuanchao. In the case of Li Yuanchao, he mentioned just New York Times a couple of months ago that within his tenure, if he's promoted to the standing committee, he would make sure there's some shakeup, some reform, some election being held within the party. So that's very dangerous or even unbelievable message that is not tolerated by the conservative base. So I think Hu just gave up. Hu also wants to make sure he has good legacy that would be passed on to future generation. He wants to give Xi Jinping the total power that he can use, he can exercise, so that he believes that within his tenure, Xi could do something.
Well, let me go back to something you said about Jiang. Basically, your interpretation is Jiang is not influential. He's just a vessel for conservatism. But we've been talking this whole time about, the Jiang faction versus Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao, their faction, in this power struggle. If you look at the current makeup of the standing committee, can you say that, one faction triumphed over the other?
Well, if you really have this definition of factions, then of course Jiang's faction wins, hands down, because there's much more representation of their faction than the Youth League faction, which has been attributed to Hu Jintao. But like what it just said earlier, Jiang is only an embodiment of the old force, and those people are old-timers. If you look at average age of the Politburo members this time, they are approaching late 60s. You know those people, you thought they believe they are affiliated with Jiang faction only because they have been around so long. And Jiang has been around the longest time. So Jiang has been used as surrogate for these people's background. However, if you go into details of the specific background, you found that actually they were all promoted from the grassroots and from across the whole country, not necessarily from Shanghai. Actually, those people who have been attributed, categorized as Jiang faction members, didn't work in Shanghai, which is very different from...
So you're saying they may not have that deep of a loyalty to Jiang?
No. But their loyalty is with the party's fundamental principle.
Yeah, but also the lines between the factions are kind of blurry. I mean, sometimes for some people it's very clear cut. You know, Jiang Zemin, Bo Xilai, Zhou Yongkang, very clear cut. Hu Jintao, Wen Jiabao is clear cut. But a lot of people are kind of floating between. You know, they may have allegiance to one side on certain issues and allegiance to another side on other issues. And also, again, because the factions aren't necessarily ideological, they're oftentimes more strategic. So if the tides shift, then so do some of the people who are riding those tides. So in that sense, it's a little bit hard to say. But there's definitely people like Zhang Dezhang, who's sort of the number 3 guy now. He definitely seemed to be more Jiang Zemin. And Li Keqiang is definitely, he's the number 2 guy, definitely Hu Jintao, who was mentored by Hu Jintao. And he's probably the only one who's actually talked at some point about separation of powers in the government, although that's now been kind of swept under the rug as much as possible. But you have a mix. I think another thing, though, to keep in mind is, even though it seems like Jiang's faction kind of won a lot of seats, a very key position that was on the previous 2 standing committees for the past decade has been removed. That is the PLAC, the Political and Legislative Affairs Committee.
Which was under Zhou Yongkang.
It was under Zhou Yongkang, which was Jiang Zemin's faction, and they had such a huge budget, it was bigger than the national defense budget. And so that group, that PLAC, is no longer in the standing committee. So it's now been, the guy who's in charge of it, Meng Jianzhu, is only in the 25-member Politburo, not in the higher standing committee. So that really lowers the power of the PLAC, which has really controlled the courts and the domestic security and a bunch of other things within the party. So it's less power for that, which is less power for Jiang's faction.
Yeah, there got to be some horse trading that's going on behind the scenes. That could be one of the bargains Hu Jintao has used to get some kind of concession from conservative base in return, in exchange for his stepping down from all posts.
Well, let me ask the final question. Do you think now that this is the CCP has stabilized after we've seen all this speculation, all this kind of, after Bo Xilai fell, all this kind of infighting, is it done now? Are they stabilized? Are they?
No, I don't think so. Actually, it would be seen as opening a floodgate. It will introduce more uncertainty for those people who are holding off moving to another country. Now, when they see the list, they think a time has come for them to do that, because that means the party has not changed at all. They just want to escape from this fallout that will bring them down intact. So in that sense, actually, it will trigger, it will definitely precipitate more uncertainty and more changes to the country and to the party.
I would say because of all these compromises, we now have reached a status quo, but they're stuck. They can't move forward and they can't move backwards, but the very status quo itself is unstable, and that's where the problem is going to come from.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining us today and giving us your analysis on the new Politburo Standing Committee. And thank you for watching. For more on this and other issues in China, join us at ntd.tv.